Mark was the truck driver.
Oh my goodness.
So Mark, the truck driver, who was their mother's boyfriend, who was abusing the other siblings, ends up dating Elizabeth after Rose's death.
You're listening to River City Mystery, a podcast that delves into the Evansville and surrounding tri-state area's mysteries, including unsolved crimes, murders, and disappearances. A show that isn't afraid to jump down the rabbit hole to investigate reports of local hauntings, sightings of UAPs and cryptids, among other paranormal phenomena. With your host, law office worker by day, insomniac researcher of the unknown by night, Matt Dyke. Welcome to episode 17. We're going to be discussing the Elizabeth Bannister case, which is basically like a demented version of the movie Clue, and we'll find out why as we get into this case. I was invited to join the show of Savannah, who actually is a member of my Discord server. She has a YouTube channel called Don't Hate Create, and I've got a link down in the show notes for that, so check out her show. And she discusses true crime sorts of stuff, and she really has been following the Delphi case really closely, so she has a lot of interesting stuff there, so check it out. She invited me to be on her show this week, and we did a live stream talking about the Elizabeth Bannister case. This episode is that discussion we had talking about Elizabeth and what happened with her back in 2000. And the Discord server, by the way, has been growing quite a bit over the past few months, so if you're interested in talking to other people about mysteries, unsolved crimes, paranormal stuff that's happening in Evansville and the surrounding tri-state area, feel free to join. You're welcome. You just go to rivercitymystery.com/Discord. And even if you're not familiar with Discord, join anyway, and we'll help you out. We'll walk you through it all. It's really a great place to kind of communicate with people who have similar interests. So you're welcome to join. So this is our discussion on the Elizabeth Bannister case. This is the case of Elizabeth Bannister. And she was murdered at 18 years old in her apartment. She was murdered in a house that's full of people, yet no one heard or saw anything. There's no shortage of suspects as far as I'm concerned. The house had, apparently at the time of her murder, which was around 1 a.m. on January 20th, 2000, there was apparently someone passed out on a couch. There was someone in the bathroom. There was somebody watching a rerun of Matlock in another room. Yet no one heard anyone come in or leave or anything. Apparently about weird. An hour. Yeah, it's very weird. And she had just an absolute tragic life. I mean, leading up to that point, it just, the more I read about it, the more like horrifying it is how just bad her life was. And her sister, Sarah, she's done some podcasts and talks a lot about, she's an advocate for finding her sister's murder. She talks a lot about the abuse that took place and that sort of thing. But she was born in California. And then when she was 8, she and her family moved to the Evansville area. And so Elizabeth she had 3 siblings. There's Sarah, Rebecca, and Doug. So Sarah, Rebecca, and Doug were from a different father than Elizabeth. So they were kind of separated for that reason, I believe. And also Elizabeth seemed to have some behavioral issues. So she spent most of her time in group homes and with other groups rather than with the other 3 siblings, which is kind of sad too.
Yeah.
So Sarah, Rebecca, and Doug ended up with one group and then Elizabeth off by herself. And Sarah tells the story about how when Elizabeth was 8, she was actually assaulted by a male relative as well. So that's when she was also sent off later on to live with someone else as well. So there was that factor as well. So she did not start off very well.
She was sent off after she got
yeah, the timeline is confusing as far as like when she was 8, she was assaulted by a male relative. So I'm not sure how soon after that she was actually sent off somewhere else. I don't know if she did not report it until a later date, but I know
that would probably explain her behavioral problems too a bit.
Correct. So I don't know who knew what and when, kind of a thing. But apparently it did damage to her to where she like couldn't have children. I mean, it was like that kind of a thing, according to her foster mother later on. said that. While Elizabeth was away living with where she was, Sarah and Rebecca and Doug were with their mom, Rose, and her various boyfriends. And apparently Rose did not pick men very well, apparently. So they were all abusive to her and the children. And one of those boyfriends that she was with was named Mark. And when Mark was a truck driver, and when Mark would go off on over the road trips, he would have Sarah or Rebecca go with him. They would demand it. And Rose, their mother, would say, yeah, I want you to go with him to give me a break, and he would only want one at a time, of course, not both of them. Apparently, Sarah and Rebecca would tell their mother, he's abusing us, he's putting his hands on us, that kind of thing. And she really wouldn't listen. So
that is really, really sad.
It's really sad.
Like, people need to listen to their children.
I do
cannot imagine.
It's appalling when people do not listen to their children saying these things. It's just like you can't believe it, but it does happen. Apparently, Mark did assault Sarah on one of these trips. She says in one of the podcasts. We'll actually listen to a clip of that here in a bit. But I don't know what he did. Rebecca has not spoken, so I don't know if she's also. But it would not surprise me if he also did stuff to her.
Yeah, I mean, it stands to reason that would happen.
Exactly. So and this just kind of, I'm giving a little background because it just gets weirder here in a bit. Rose started going downhill physically and started needing some help. So Elizabeth came home with Rose and started helping her at home, and she ended up passing away. Elizabeth actually found her mother dead in the bed. She had apparently passed away of emphysema, and there's some weirdness there too, because apparently she was next to her then boyfriend, which was not Mark at the time, apparently, but a dog had eaten like half of her face off. So apparently she had been there long enough for a dog to have eaten her face, but the guy she was with didn't know. So
my gosh,
there's some suspicion there with like what really happened, but I don't think that was ever even an open case or anything. It's just she passed away of emphysema.
And then Elizabeth was dating a guy that her
correct
mom was with.
After Rose passes away, Elizabeth goes back to the group home. I think she goes to Hillcrest, Washington Youth Home in Evansville until she ages out. And when she ages out at 18, she moves into the apartment on Washington Avenue, which is where she was murdered. She moved in with her then boyfriend, Mark, who was the same guy that her mother was engaged to or dating, whatever, later on. So, yes, she ends up dating Mark, her deceased mother's fiance, I guess you'd say.
Wow.
This obviously caused issues with Sarah and Elizabeth, because Sarah was appalled that, this man who had done all of these bad things to her and her sister would actually be interested in their other sister, and that she would go along with it.
Mark was the truck driver?
Mark was the truck driver.
Oh, my goodness.
So Mark, the truck driver, who was their mother's boyfriend, who was abusing the other siblings, ends up dating Elizabeth after Rose's death.
That's crazy. Was Elizabeth older than the other three, or she was
little
younger?
bit, yeah, she's a few years older. I think she's 4 years older than Sarah, and I'm not sure how old the other siblings were. I don't know that, but she's older than the others.
Okay.
Yeah. So Mark was obviously one of the people who were questioned by the police, because he's clearly on that list of people who might have reasons to have done something, I guess.
He's just at the very top of mind right now, as far as I know from this story.
And Kelly Fontaine is the foster mother who actually helped raise Elizabeth from the time she was 12 to 17. She was a big part of her life at that time. She says that Mark had something to do with it. She knew Mark had something to do with it before she even knew the details that she was even dating Mark. She did not know that they were dating, and she immediately suspected Mark for whatever reason. I guess he gave her a bad vibe or something. But she was kind of shocked to learn that they were actually dating at the time that she was murdered. But he apparently had an alibi. He was working when she was murdered. So
yeah, right. I'm just kidding.
That's what I'm thinking. I've fallen down so many rabbit holes to figure out who this guy is, because none of the names have been released other than Sarah saying his name, Mark, on a few podcasts. Because I'm trying to figure out, like, where did the guy work? Like, how did they verify he was at work? I don't know if he was a truck driver at that time. I know he was back a few years earlier, but was he a truck driver then? I guess that would be easier to verify if you were on the road or something, but it's not that hard for somebody to clock you in if you're like working at a plant or something.
Totally. Yeah.
The coroner, who was Annie Groves, says that it was a crime of passion because apparently she was stabbed multiple times in her apartment. And apparently the first stabbing was fatal. Like, it hit her in the aorta. And that's the one that did her in. And the person just kept stabbing. They think it's a crime of passion, not like just some random guy staggering into the apartment.
Because he like overdid it.
Overdid it. Right. So, but there's no proof. At the time, and to add some more strange things here, about an hour before she was murdered, Elizabeth had asked a friend for some money to use the payphone. The friend came over, gave her the money, and left. And he comes back an hour later to check on her for some reason. I don't know why he would. I don't know if he was coming back to get more money, get the money back, or
where was the payphone at?
That I don't know. So I'm guessing it was nearby their house. She borrows money from this friend to use a payphone. An hour later, he comes back to check on her, and he finds her dead, or he finds the crime scene. I don't know if he's the one who actually found her body, but he comes back and finds that she's been murdered. So a cabbie was questioned by police because a cab did actually come to the house, had been called, but no one ever came out when he got there, so he took off. So we don't know, like, where was she going, that kind of thing. So we've got another, that's always a strange situation. Just the friend with borrowing money and coming back to check on her an hour later, that's just strange as well. There are reports in the Evansville papers that a neighbor saw an African-American male jump out of a window and run down the street.
That sounds like, I don't know. I'm not going to say convenient. It sounds like a little bit of racism or something, like, I don't know. Maybe,
there's a black guy there was. I don't know. It's yet another strange part of this. And then, and it just gets stranger with this.
Did she live in like a bad part of town though? I guess I shouldn't say that it's like out of.
Yeah, it wasn't a great part of town. And she lived in a house that a lady owned it. Apparently the lady who lived there, who owned it, was in her 70s. And I don't think she was doing very well either, because I've been doing some research on her, but I think she had maybe Alzheimer's or dementia kind of developing at that time. But she would bring in these people. She kind of turned her house into an apartment complex where people would just come in and rent rooms. So I think she was living in the basement. Yeah.
The lady was living in the basement of that house?
The lady was living in the basement, from what I understand. And then she was renting out the room, so that there were 4 people renting rooms, I believe, at that time. There was Elizabeth and then 3 others, I believe.
Oh, the pictures you sent me, it was torn down, right?
It was torn down. Let me give you, I've got a picture here.
Like the older picture, is that?
Yeah, it's like a black and white. It was from the newspaper.
Yeah. I have that, I think.
You got that? Okay. And I went there a few months ago to take some pictures of the actual scene. I got a video as well of the current scene, but...
Oh, you could share your screen if you want. Hiawatha says that they would love to read the police report, and you did try to get like FOIA the information, right? And they wouldn't give you stuff, or
they would not give me anything. Go ahead and share your screen, because mine is not bringing up my pictures for some reason. Sure. I sent a FOIA request to the Evansville Police Department a couple of months ago. Maybe it was over a month ago. And since, this has been now almost 25 years, I've got to think that this is, not considered a super active case. So I did send a FOIA request for all of the information on this case. And then they responded a couple of weeks ago that they are still considering this an active case. So they're not going to release any of the police reports, which is very frustrating. It's like, it's almost a quarter of a century later. It's like, come on.
Yeah. Yeah, that's crazy.
Yeah, I mean, so I would really love to read the police report as well. Yeah, there's the house. So she apparently lived. God, that's a horrible picture. But that's really one of the only ones I could find because, like I said, it was knocked down. So what happened was in 2004, the owner of the house was apparently a hoarder. Apparently, she was not doing well at all. So she would stack newspapers all over the place, and they caught on fire, and the whole place burned down in 2004. So, which is kind of upsetting because I mean, it had whatever evidence might have been in this house is gone. So they really can't, look into anything any further. So, which makes it even more difficult.
Yeah.
But yeah, so now it's just a vacant lot.
So, this happened in 2000. Is that correct?
Yeah, this was in 2000. So a couple of years ago, this was in 2023, and this is another twist it just gets weirder and weirder. In 2023, Phil Chalmers, a podcaster who has a podcast called, or did have a podcast. I don't think he's releasing episodes anymore, but it's called Where the Bodies Are Buried.
Okay.
And his very first episode, he interviews William Clyde Gibson. William Clyde Gibson is a serial killer who killed 3 people in the Louisville, New Albany, Indiana area in, I believe, 2012, that time. And he's on Indiana's death row right now for murder. And I'm not going to get into the graphic details, but he was basically a bad guy. The stuff he was doing was pretty much horrible. But during this podcast, he actually brings up murdering Elizabeth Bannister. And he goes into some details about why what he did exactly. And, he mentions her name and that kind of thing. If we want to, I think I have it queued up. If we want to listen to some of it, what he says.
Yeah. Somebody was saying something about like a new law being passed in Indiana, or like semi-new law, where after like a certain length of time, if like a family member can request that a case be either like given to somebody else or like not declared a cold case, so that more information can get out. I wonder if that's something that could happen.
That's something to definitely look into. So maybe if the family, Sarah in particular, maybe want something to think about, because she's actually agreed to talk to me on my for a future episode. Sarah, Elizabeth's sister. So that might be something I ask her.
Yeah, for sure.
Because I was holding off on interviewing her until after the FOIA information came through, because I was hoping I'd get that and then be able to kind of look through all that stuff and then have better questions for her. But apparently that's not going to happen now. So,
well, that would be cool if she could get like that.
Yeah, it would. Because it's been 25 years. And also, we have a confession. This guy is confessing, which it makes me think, too, that maybe they don't buy his confession. Because if they, they could close the case out and say, oh, yeah, a serial killer just confessed. It's a closed case. But they've not closed the case. It's still considered active, even though he has confessed. Also, Sarah does not buy the confession as well. She's come out and said that she's not satisfied that he actually did it.
Well, like, what are the chances that he would just be like, I mean, I don't know if he was like common to that area. Was he like, I don't know.
I don't think so. I don't think that I'm not aware. I mean, he didn't have any other killings in the Evansville area that I'm aware of. I mean, the thing is, he claims he's killed 33 people. He's been convicted of killing 3. So there are other people that he claims are out there. And so that's this Phil Chalmers. His whole point of his podcast was to talk to serial killers and convicted killers to try to get them to confess to other crimes they've committed.
Oh, yeah.
So, it's kind of convenient. In his very first episode, he does find somebody who just spills the beans on a old case. So some people are very suspicious of that. It's very convenient. But the guy did say, I mean, it is recorded. It's a recorded conversation. But a lot of these convicted killers they want attention and to be relevant. So maybe he's just...
Well, I think that you're right. I think the police would probably have like it wouldn't be a cold case anymore because they'd have a confession and
Right. Exactly. So this is the part to where Phil is actually talking to William Clyde Gibson in his prison, I guess the prison, about the case here.
Hello, this is a prepaid call from
William Gibson,
an inmate at the Indiana State Prison.
Here's what I want to ask you, Clyde. Are you positive you killed Elizabeth Bannister in Evansville, Indiana, which was a very high-profile case?
Yes.
Elizabeth Bannister is a cold case murder that dates back 20 years. So we know the details of the case. We know that Elizabeth was killed inside of her home, which was split up into little apartments. We know she was stabbed to death. We also know that the perpetrator escaped without being seen. My next step now is to talk to William Clyde Gibson and to see what he has to say about the case and see if his story matches up with the story the media released. A lot of your crimes have to run together. How do you know of her specifically?
Well, I just remember, but just mainly because of what she looked like.
How do you know that was her name, though?
Well, she told me her name when I first met her, and I just remember.
Okay.
There's a lot of details I don't remember just because of the time. There's so many other people that I killed. It's hard to keep it all in line.
Was it a big case? Like, was it on the news and stuff?
Well, I don't really know because I went back to New Orleans, so we don't get much news down there. You know what I mean?
Walk me through it. You're literally from the very beginning moment you laid eyes on Elizabeth Bannister, where, how, walk me through the whole story until you left.
Well, like I said, I just seen her on the side of the road waving her hands and shit. Just went to ride. I picked her up.
And then
that from there.
You picked you up and you took her to her house, right?
Right. As far as what I can remember, like I said, I was shown. What I tell you might not be exactly correct, but I remember a great big mirror or something breaking. I'm pretty sure of that.
Okay.
But it was like a big apartment type building or something, like a house, but it was a bunch of apartments. So that's what it seemed like to me. It was nighttime when we went.
Yep.
I don't recall that much of it.
And did you kind of walk into the apartment with her?
There was other people around too. It wasn't like, it was incognito type stuff. They was outside and shit, but it was just weird. The shit happened like that to me many times where I should have been caught,
Right.
I just killed her and pretty much left. I didn't hack her up that bad. Just stabbed her up.
You stabbed her?
Mm-hmm.
So you're just like, I kind of have the feeling I think I can kill this girl. I'm going to follow her in and do this.
Yeah. That's how it works. That's how I did most of them. I just go out with that mindset, and that's what ended up happening. I never knew exactly who it was going to be. You know what I mean?
Right. Do you remember stabbing her, and where'd you stab her, and how many times?
If I sit around and think about it for a while, it might come back to me. I see it in my mind. You know what I mean?
When you left, did anybody see you leave?
Well, I wasn't really paying attention, but I'm sure that people did see me leave.
You got the hell out of there, got in your truck, and went home.
Yeah.
All right. So that's, I could go on. You can listen to the rest of the episode if you'd like. It's actually pretty interesting. But, so someone says, if he said he killed her, why not believe him? That's a good question. Sarah, the sister, doesn't believe him because some of the details don't line up with what apparently happened.
Was there a mirror that was broken?
That's a good question. I don't know. But that's a very specific thing to mention. If there was a broken mirror, there's not much. They haven't released a lot about the case. The murder weapon we assume was a knife. I don't think it was ever found. I think they're withholding some of the information to see if somebody does come forward at some point. They might know something, and they don't want to release everything, obviously, because for that reason. But Sarah
sounds like Indiana.
Exactly. Some of the information doesn't line up with whatever actually happened according to Sarah. So I don't know what that is.
Is he saying that he gave her a ride to her house and then went in with her and killed her? Because that's not what happened, right? Because she was at home beforehand.
Well, right? One thing she was at home. So one thing that could have happened is where she was hailing or, waiting for a cab on the corner. Maybe he drove by and saw her there. It didn't. This wasn't discussed, but she apparently was prostituting at that time too. So I don't know if he picked her up for that reason, and under that circumstance, she was bringing him back under those circumstances. But apparently, she had called a cab, but didn't make it to the cab. So I don't know if she was standing outside and he happened to see her. That's not clear.
So was he like a big rig truck driver?
That I don't know. I don't think he was. I'm not aware that he was a truck driver. I just think he was out.
Oh, he was just like in a truck driving, and then she held him. I get it.
Yeah. Sarah doesn't believe it. After talking to him, do you believe his story? What you're feeling? After talking to,
I think he's talking about like that interview. After like listening to that interview.
Yeah. I don't know why someone would make up something so random. It seems so specific to me. I would be leaning towards that he did it. Like, I don't know what he has to gain by bringing up Elizabeth Bannister of all people, because it really wasn't. It's kind of a random case. It's not like some sort of prolific case everyone's been talking about for 20 years. It's something.
But was it a big case at the time?
It just wasn't. I think some of these, it was a kind of a bizarre case, but it didn't get a lot. It wasn't like a national. I don't understand why this one isn't like a Dateline NBC 48 hours kind of high profile case. Like, I could see Nancy Grace like going crazy on something like this. I mean, you have all these suspects and just the craziness of it, but it really wasn't. She was just murdered, and police just. I think for people like that who are kind of living on the outskirts of society, they don't get a lot of. If she had come from a wealthy family, probably this had gotten a lot more attention.
Right.
To be honest, it just didn't.
Well, he said that there was people all around when they went in, right? Like,
right, and nobody saw anything. I mean, they have to believe. The police must really believe all of the people in the house, or I cannot imagine that they'd all be lying. And having seen this killer come in, it seems like somebody would have said, "Oh yeah, we saw this guy." And the fact that he says,
sure.
"I don't know if somebody could have seen me or not." I mean, it seems like you'd remember if somebody saw you after you murdered somebody. Like, it seems like that would stick in your head. Like, oh yeah, there was a guy standing there.
Well, and he'd be like drenched in blood, probably.
Right. But these people who are in this house, I think it's again kind of like we were saying, it's kind of a seedy neighborhood, and I don't think these are people up late studying kind of people. They're probably all drunk and high or whatever. So they might have just, if they did see something, they weren't paying attention. I don't know. It's just a sad situation. Sarah doesn't buy it. So the case is still active. It's not closed. So I don't think the police necessarily buy his story either.
Yeah. I mean, that mirror detail would definitely like be something that they would be able to check, or they would like know about,
Yeah, I mean, to me, that's like if there was a weird mirror that had broken or something, that would be a case closed situation in my mind. Like, what are the chances that he knows about a mirror that was broken?
Yeah. Was she killed in the bathroom or in her room?
I don't know. Sarah had mentioned in a podcast that she was up in her room. So she mentioned that somebody would have had to have come in two doors, in the bottom door, and then gone upstairs and then gone into her bedroom or her apartment.
Oh.
I think she was killed in her apartment, which was upstairs. So it's not like somebody has staggered in and randomly killed her. They would have had to have gone to her specific apartment.
Right. And what I understand about the house is that there was like a communal bathroom, and then each of like then there was like little apartments throughout, right?
Right. It had been converted to multiple apartments, but they all shared one bathroom. So, people are coming and going all the time, I assume.
That would be an interesting living situation. So, and then her mom's ex-boyfriend / her boyfriend, he lived in the same apartment thing, but didn't she also have an ex-boyfriend that lived there?
Yeah. So some of the early reports I think people were confused on the relationships. I think because some of the reports say, oh yeah, an ex-boyfriend and her mom's ex-boyfriend lived there. That was the same person. I think. I don't think she had an ex living there along with the guy she was dating, Mark, who was her mom's ex. But they have not released who these other people in the house were. So I don't know.
And then like the guy that came over or that gave her money for that, I think maybe that's like he was getting drugs or getting like paying for sex or something. Cause like, why would he come over and give her money for the payphone and then leave and then come back to check or something?
Yeah, that doesn't sound right. That sounds like a story to me of some kind, like he was buying, like I agree. There was something else there. Like, why would you give some? I mean, what is a phone call? Like a quarter at the time or something? Like,
Well, and how
came back?
she's gonna get it back like afterwards? Like, if she had the money, she would already.
Like, why would she? What did he think she was doing? Maybe he thought she was going to be earning some money doing something, and then he was going to come back and get the money.
Yeah, maybe.
See, something about that doesn't make any sense. Yeah, definitely. And why would he come back to check on her? Like, what? I hope the police ask these questions. That's all I have to say. Like, why did you think you needed to, like, if I let someone borrow $1 or whatever it was, like, I'm not going to at 1:00 in the morning go check on them an hour later. So, is everything still okay? You know, why would I do that?
Yeah, that doesn't make
sense. But again, we're dealing with probably some interesting people here. So Sarah later on, like when she turns 18, starts investigating herself. Like she wants to find the answers. So she goes back to the house. Of course, the house has been, knocked down as a vacant lot, but she goes around to the neighbors and starts asking them questions. And one of the neighbors that was living there at the time was still there. So she was asking him questions. And he said he distinctly remembers Elizabeth arguing with Mark in the yard that night, but Mark was working. So this is what the neighbor is saying. He knew Mark apparently. So I don't know whether there's if that's believable or not. I have no idea.
Well, I can't decide if I just don't like Mark because of what he did to like her little sisters and stuff, or if because like that's a person that I'm like, oh yeah, he did it. He's obviously a piece of crap, like,
right.
But
I mean, there's no shortage of reasons to not like this guy.
Yeah. But
whether or not he did it, I mean, the police apparently they checked out his alibi and he's not a suspect apparently for that reason. I would like to dig into more about his alibi. Like, what did he say he was doing? And is it possible to fudge those records or whatever to say he was, or did he pay somebody off to say he was there and it wasn't?
Yeah.
Because I know he's not a suspect and he was apparently working, but he's got to be at the top of the list. Then you have the serial killer coming forward saying he did it too. So
did he volunteer that like without the podcaster bringing it up, or did the podcaster like bring it up?
He randomly brought it up in the middle of the episode. Like the podcaster had never heard of Elizabeth Bannister before. So in the middle of the podcast, he's talking about the other 3 murders, which are horrible, by the way, if you're wanting to listen to those, but they're just horrible. But he starts digging for other cold case, for him to drop hints about things, and he just drops Elizabeth Bannister's name randomly. He didn't expect it. He was like, is this guy just feeding me is he just feeding me crap? So he Googles Elizabeth Bannister and finds out there is a cold case out of Evansville, and he's like, oh, maybe he's onto something here, and he just goes on from there. So he did not go into it thinking, oh, I'm going to see if I can get him talking about Elizabeth Bannister or anything. He brought it up himself. I mean, he could have Googled it or found cold cases and just randomly, landed on that one, I guess. But it'd be strange. But I don't know what to think. It's one of these things that you can kind of convince yourself of multiple people having done this.
Well, I mean, any of those people, it seems like the cops would have moved forward on it if it's still an active investigation,
And I've gone down some rabbit holes myself. There are ways to find out who lived in certain places at certain times. So I've gone through lists of people who I think might have been living there at that time and done background searches to find out if there was someone who was there who's got some sort of seedy history that would be flagging me. But it's easy to get lost down these rabbit holes and you don't know what you're really going to find anyway. But because the truth is, the people who rent these sorts of rooms are not model citizens. Almost all of them have serious records because they need cheap places to live, and she probably accepted cash or something. I mean, you know what I mean? It's a certain kind of person is attracted to those kinds of places. So it's it's hard to kind of nail down who might be a suspect or who even was in the house at that time. I have to think that the owner of the house, the 70-year-old lady, might have been I don't know if she was one of the 3 or if she was in the basement and not even considered being there. I'm kind of confused on that.
I don't know. It's kind of funny to think of, I don't know, an old lady in the basement, but
it really is. It really is. The whole situation is just bizarre.
Yeah.
It really is. I don't know if you have any questions or anyone in the chat does.
Let me see. Sorry. Oh, it's Evansdale and Evansville.
Oh,
You're talking about
Evansville.
that is a little confusing.
Yeah,
Good
Evansville is in
catch.
southern Indiana.
Where's Evansdale?
I'm not sure where Evansdale is. Let me look. Iowa. Apparently Evansdale is in Iowa.
Interesting. Well, yeah, I guess like with that case, I would say that yeah, this person said probably walking from or to the payphone. Like that guy could have like picked her up, I think is what they're saying.
And she had only lived, I'm kind of looking through my notes here. She had dropped out of high school. She didn't finish high school. She worked at Rally's, which is like a fast food restaurant in Evansville on the west side of Evansville. A few months prior to her death, she had worked at Rally's, according to one of her coworkers, who was apparently a friend of hers. She only lived there at the apartment for a few weeks, apparently, before she was murdered there.
Oh, her sister, the last thing that she told her was she hated her. That's sad.
Oh. What's kind of strange about Sarah, she talks about there's a podcast called Dealing Justice, where Sarah talks about her sister's case. And she mentions that on the night that Elizabeth was murdered, so she was murdered around, the police were called and arrived at 1:11 a.m. on January 20th. So around 1:11 a.m. is when all that happened. Apparently, the night of Elizabeth's murder, Sarah had a dream that Elizabeth was running through the woods being chased by someone with a knife and being killed by someone with a knife. And Sarah wakes up at 1:04, 1:02, 1:03 a.m., in a panic, thinking, oh my God, Elizabeth just got stabbed. And little did she know that, she probably had been at that time. So very strange. And I'm not saying she's a suspect or anything, but it's really bizarre. And then she, they had the fight was the last real conversation. She later went through her, Sarah was going through Elizabeth's things later on and found a note that Elizabeth had written to Sarah that said, I'm sorry, I forgive you, Sarah. I love you. So she never.
That's way cool, at least.
Yeah, she did find that. So she, of course, broke down after finding that. But I guess she never gave it to Sarah, but she found that in her stuff. So just a horrible story all around, basically.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. I think I have another clip we could watch really quick.
Oh, okay.
Let me share my screen. Oh, somebody asked, was the murder weapon found and DNA and fingerprints? Cryptex, was it?
Yeah. The murder weapon was never found, as far as I know. So they say that a knife was never found on the scene or whatever. So whoever took off with the murder weapon. They say it's possible that they're not releasing that information. And the last we heard was they were doing DNA testing on William Clyde Gibson to see if any of the DNA matched whatever they might have found at the
Is that the serial killer?
It's the serial killer, and nothing has ever been released on that. So, I mean, that's been enough time where they'd have some information, but there's no news on that. So I don't know if they've also factored that in to the fact that they're not really taking him seriously.
Yeah, probably, huh? Okay, so we can watch this clip really quick, or maybe we'll watch the whole thing. I don't know. We'll see how good it is.
Sure.
It's 2 decades after the murder of their loved one. It's a story we first brought you on Monday, and tonight another family member says it has more questions than answers, and there may be a potential break in the case. Eyewitness News' Noah Alonso has the latest on the investigation.
I feel like I've been disrespected. I feel like me and my siblings, my family have been disrespected. Somebody on the inside is trying to use their authority and their power to cover something else up.
It's a story Eyewitness News first brought you on Monday, a potential break in a cold case from 2000. The family of Elizabeth Bannister is keeping up the pressure tonight as a private investigator now says agents are nearing closure on the case. One of Bannister's sisters, Rebecca Sweat, says she still has many questions.
They all ruled them, the police force ruled everybody out. It makes no sense at all. I mean, I don't understand this at all. Then nobody heard anything strange. Okay, so all of a sudden somebody goes in there and they see her stabbed multiple times. Okay, 3 people in the apartment at the time, it says at the time, never saw anyone break in. Okay, but an elderly neighbor saw a African American man flee the scene.
The family says they are fed up with the response from Evansville police.
I feel like they did absolutely nothing. All they did was go and talk to people that were around there, that were supposedly around at the time of her death. Then what? Okay, shake it off. No suspects. Rule out. 2 weeks later, cold case.
And a promise from a family still reeling from a tragic death 20 years ago to never give up.
I just want people to know that I'm not blaming, I'm not pointing fingers at anybody, but if you really look at this case, if you really sit down and look at this case and take all of the articles that were from point A to point B, from the beginning to the end, take them and compare them, and they make no sense. I just feel like they need to start doing more work.
In Evansville, Noah Alata, Eyewitness News.
We reached out to the Evansville Police Department earlier this week, and we were told that detectives are looking at a possible person of interest. We'll pass along more information as soon as it becomes available.
Yeah, 15 people of interest.
That's weird that they said that the private investigator said something, but they didn't say anything about what it was. I don't know. I guess maybe it's not weird, but
yeah, I think the person of interest, is when they were talking about the serial killer, William Clyde Gibson. I think that was coming out with, where they're looking into him at that time. So I don't know if that was the person they were talking about as the person of interest.
Oh, I see. Yeah.
I'm not aware that there's been another person of interest other than him after that podcast came out in 2023. So
yeah, I think it's Mark. I don't know.
Right. And actually I have another clip of Sarah talking about Mark a little bit more if you want to hear about that.
Yeah,
it's
definitely.
kind of her talking about Mark and how he treated them, and it's coming from her. It sounds a little better than me saying it, but let me.
Right, and then this Cryptex asks, sensitive question, could be drug related. I mean,
that could certainly be on the table with a drug deal gone right. Well, considering she borrowed money for a phone call, and who knows if that wasn't really drug money to go get drugs, and somebody, I would say it could be. I think anything is on the table here.
And then the person running out, maybe could be the dealer or a John if she was being a prostitute. That's a high risk occupation. So
it is.
Yeah.
And I mean, it could even be a situation where she was murdered in her apartment and some other guy was going up there to do something and finds her and then runs. He freaks out and runs out. It might be the guy that ran away wasn't responsible. You know what I mean? I think anything is possible at this point. He could have been there for drugs or for any number of reasons and ran out, if that even happened. I mean, that's just the neighbor saying it, but I mean, I don't know why the neighbor would make that up, but.
Well, she was elderly, and so I don't know how good her sight is, or there's a lot of questions there. What was she doing up at 1:00 in the morning? Yeah, I don't know. The neighbor, I think it was a man, but I don't know if they've named who the neighbor was that saw the African American running out. Did they? Oh, say? I thought it was that older lady that they showed, but that probably wasn't. Oh, it might have been. I don't know. Yeah, they probably wouldn't show who the eyewitness was. They might not. I wouldn't want my name anywhere around this case, honestly. Yeah. As somebody who's a witness anyway. Mm-hmm. All right, let me get this queued up. Yeah, I don't know. I always thought it was Evansdale too. Maybe it's always been Evansville. That's crazy. We only make the news for bad things. So when there's a tragedy or drug things, it's we were the meth capital of the world and stuff. Oh, that's something to be proud of right there. Exactly. So it's can we not ever win any nice awards? I guess I wouldn't have material for my podcast if we did. Yeah. All right. And this is a clip from the Dealing Justice podcast, season 1, episode 8, where they're talking to Sarah, Elizabeth's sister, about the case.
Mark was not And I think everybody knew that. My mother, I love her to death, but she tended to be with men who were very abusive towards her and us. My mom just never believed the stories that we would try to tell her when it came to her boyfriends. Mark broke my finger trying to spank me with a belt. Mark was a truck driver, and we were made to go with him. We didn't have a choice. Give my mom a so-called break. He wanted us to take turns, and I would go with him one time, and then my sister would go with him another time.
He would take you and your other sister, though, on the truck rides, not Elizabeth, right? It was just you and your other sister?
Me and Rebecca, he would take on truck rides. I didn't want to go because of, he's already putting his hands on me. Like, I was scared, I didn't want to go. I begged my mom not to make me go. And she would make me go. Like, you can't, we wanted to go, me and my sister wanted to go together. And he said no. But he never would let two of us go. He'd only do one. Each one of us, one at a time. Now I know why. Well, when I was in the truck with him, I was 8 years old, and he told me he wants her. Those were his words. He wants her. And I had no idea what he was talking about. And I asked him, what are you talking about? He pointed to what he was talking about. He would point.
Only Mark and Sarah were in the truck together, so that means when Mark was pointing and saying her, he was pointing at Sarah.
And he said he wants her, as he pointed to what he was talking about. So I was scared. I told him no. And he writes me, being 8 years old, you don't think parents are telling you, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to hurt you, yada, yada, yada. You're going to believe it, You're going to believe it because you love them or you care about them. I never talked about it. The only person I ever told was my sister. So as I got older, when my sister was murdered, me and my adopted mom, I told my adopted mom, I remember we were in the bathroom and she was doing my hair, we were talking, and I told her everything that I just mentioned. And she said, Sarah, why have you not told me this before? I was scared. Like I was going to get beat. Nobody would believe me. I was terrified. She reported to the authorities. She did call them and she reported everything that I told her. They spoke with me and then they spoke back to her. According to authorities, there is nothing that they can do because they don't know where it happened. Given that I was in a semi-truck, one of those ones with a bed in it, because you go over state lines, or I couldn't verify that it happened here at one point. Because not every time, it happened twice. So, before we got taken again. So I'm not sure, where it happened. I don't know any of that. And because we don't know that information, they're saying that there's nothing they could do.
There's even more shocking information to come involving Mark. Their mother, Rose, was guilty of having terrible taste in men, but one thing Sarah does insist upon was, despite it all, she loved her mother.
My mother, I love her dearly, and I will always love her, and I don't blame her for anything. She bought us what she could. She fed us. She had a bed for us. She had bedrooms. She had all that. It was just her health conditions were wearing in on her, and we were molested and abused in the home, but it was never by her. She had a lot of health problems.
Rose's health continued to deteriorate. And as Elizabeth was turning 17, Rose was able to get custody back of Elizabeth. Elizabeth moved in with her mom and Mark, and she helped care for her ailing mother. In 1997, Elizabeth and Sarah's mother passed away.
Elizabeth was there, I guess. She found her body, I think, is what happened. She had emphysema. When they did the autopsy, they found out that she had emphysema, and they claimed that she died of emphysema.
Well, how old was she when she passed away? She was how old?
I think she was in her 30s.
Elizabeth was not yet 18 when her mom died. So after she lost her mother, she was briefly put into a group home. until she aged out of the system. And then she moved in with Mark. That's right. She moved in with the same man who took Sarah on those truck driving runs.
And this is where it comes with when I said I was angry with Elizabeth, because she knew. She knew what happened to me. And she started living with him when she got out the group home.
Elizabeth and Mark weren't just roommates either.
He asked her to marry him, is what she told me. And I thought it was immoral. I thought it was wrong. He was engaged to my mother. And I told her if she did, I'll never speak to her again. And that I hated her for it.
Yeah, so it's pretty horrible.
Well, I mean, it does kind of like make sense because he was like grooming her, obviously.
Right.
She wasn't 18 yet, so like it's not really like her fault. You get like a skewed vision of like what, like, you know, love or caring is. So
yeah, and according to Kelly Fontaine, and Kelly Fontaine was the foster mother for Elizabeth for a number of years. I think she was between 12 and 17 years old. So she had a big part of her life at that time. Mm-hmm. And Kelly says that Elizabeth was kind of like mentally stunted as an 18. Basically, she was, a 17-year-old with an 8-year-old mentality. Mm-hmm. She never really, progressed past that sort of mentality. So yeah, it's definitely, I could see how she might fall into this with Mark, I guess.
Yeah. Yeah, he does not sound like a very nice guy for sure.
No. So I don't know what, I don't know what's become of Mark or, what he's doing. Hopefully he's moved on to good things in his life and he's not continuing this sort of behavior, but I don't know.
Seriously doubt. I have no hopes for that, really. Sounds like he was doing it for years and years. And
it's not like a one-time thing.
Yeah.
I'd be curious to know, I hope the police that are investigating this look into that sort of a thing and he's involved in another disappearance or this weird thing happened over here. I hope people are connecting these dots, but I've looked into these things long enough to know that they don't. I don't think there's a lot of follow-up or things. I think that's why internet sleuths need to kind of connect dots for them sometimes, because I don't think they do. They don't have the resources a lot of times to especially if he's moved out of the area, if he's living in. Well, as far as I know, I think he is living out of state, from what I found. But
did he move right after the murders or the murder?
No, not long after. Yeah, so from what I can tell, he's living out of state. So I haven't really looked into see if if there are criminal records up there or whatever, that kind of thing. But
I mean, if they got in a fight in the yard and then that happened, nobody heard it in the house, quote unquote. Right. I don't know. He just seems like definitely one to look at.
It's unbelievable for me that no one heard anything in the house. I just can't believe it. Somebody got murdered. I had to be a fight or something, and nobody heard anything. But
you said that the first stab got her. Got
that's
her
true.
right.
So maybe if you just walked in and did it, then maybe there was no noise, and it just But if he was in a rage, if he's stabbing, and I don't know. Maybe there was loud music or something. Maybe there was. I don't know.
Seems like somebody would have heard.
I'm in the bathroom. What? You were in the bathroom for what? For when? Were you in the bathroom? Exactly that moment? How did you know that was the moment that was happening?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? I was in the bathroom at that time. Well, at what time?
She was found at 1, but that doesn't mean that's when she was actually killed, huh?
She was killed. Well, so the timeline is between midnight and 1. It was when she was killed because the guy let her borrow the money at around midnight, he says. And so when he comes back at 1 o'clock or whatever, has been murdered. So it's between midnight and 1 a.m. that, according to the timeline from that guy that she borrowed money from, that would be the timeline. And the coroner, Annie Groves, says that she had been dead a very short period of time. So it was not. It was between probably midnight and 1 that actually happened.
Yeah. So I would think that maybe the music wouldn't be allowed then, but I don't really know because I'm that's past the time you should have your music loud. But I know that people don't follow the rules a lot,
Yeah. And you have an old lady living in the basement, you've got somebody asleep on a couch, passed out, drunk or whatever. And then you've got somebody in the bathroom and somebody watching Matlock. Somebody watching Matlock is probably not, screaming Metallica or something, whatever they were listening to at that time. It could have been somebody listening to music, but I don't know who it would have been because they all seem to have an alibi. Was the guy in the bathroom listening to music?
Yeah, I don't know.
I don't know. So I don't know that we're ever going to find an answer on this one, but hopefully they do get some answers.
If you have any information on Elizabeth's case that you think may be relevant, call the Evansville Police Department at 812-436-7979. Even if you think it's an insignificant detail, maybe it'll be that one thing that helps crack the case. And be sure to check out the links. I have links to all of the podcasts we referenced today, as well as Savannah's YouTube channel, as well as my Discord server if you want to check that out. Thank you for listening, and until next time, take care.